Hey everyone, we're going to take a look at chapter 2. Now, I wanted to say in this video that I am probably going to be covering this different information within systems and procedures by creating little videos of different information. I think that that will work better than standing up and giving a lecture over it. That way, the video is a lot more concise. You know what you're going to get into. And also, it does enable students, hopefully, to better understand the topic. And if you don't care to understand the topic, then you don't feel trapped. All right. So, funny enough, for those of you that are in the cybersecurity degree, chapter 2 is about security. And so, this stuff you have already been exposed to. Now, you may find some of the terminology a little different than it usually is in a different book, but you're going to find that as you go through different information. This is meant more for somebody in business to understand what's going on. So they may use some terms that are not as technical as you've learned in other classes. And you may go, wait a minute, that's called this over here. But a lot of it will be the same. For instance, right, attack vector and so on. So let's move forward through this. I'll be jumping through some slides as we go through. We definitely are going to take a look at attack vector and spend some time on CIA for this class and what that means. We're not talking about the Central Intelligence Agency. We're talking about something else. And of course, a very complex trade-off regarding IS security. In other words, you put a lot of effort, which is a lot of money spent, and that can make things more difficult and harder to use and when you try to make things more secure. So let's dig in. All right, so a big thing, why computer incidents are so prevalent. Just generally, what we're talking about, of course, is that computing is used more and more. It's used across the world, and the more we use technology, the more we're going to need security, and the more complex these systems are going to become. And so that's why this computer incidents are becoming so prevalent. Now, there is another thing there, as it says, bring your own device, BYOD down at the bottom. There's pros and cons to bringing your own device, but that creates some security risks. Now, what bring your own device means is it means that I have a phone and it's a very high powered, oh, look, it's invisible. It's an invisible phone. I have a phone. There I am. And that phone is very powerful and I can do a ton of work on it. So I have Microsoft Teams installed on that. I can access any of the information that is here in my office. I can access on that phone, but it's my phone, right? I own it. And that does create some problems when you're dealing with somebody that this is my phone, but it's got company data on it. You might start guessing as to what that is. Anyway, and then, of course, using software that has known vulnerabilities. The software is always going to have vulnerabilities, zero-day exploits that basically a hacker can get into and mess with. And, having to update that and patch that all the time is not only tiring, but it is complex. Anyway, so let's get into things. So they talk about stuff going up, but I wanted to mention this. Who causes the problems? Number one, careless insider, meaning somebody who didn't intend to do anything but get their job done. Oops, I made a mistake. Second, malicious employees. So an insider who deliberately attacks. So in other courses, you should have learned that if you're on the inside of the network, there's less security involved there. There's a certain amount of trust that's given to you so that you can not have to jump through as many holes, jump through as many hoops as you would have had to do if you're on the outside. You are trusted, right? So those are two things that really affect things. When you have a malicious employee, you're banking on being able to trust all employees, and you've lowered the security levels so it's not as frustrating for people on the inside, but they may still be there. And then, of course, cyber criminals on the rise constantly because there's money. There's money involved in hacking you. Hacktivists, which personally just hate you because you are the man, right? Or you are from the United States, so they hate you. And then there's a lone wolf attacker, which sounds really cool, but that's somebody who violates computer or internet security maliciously for illegal personal gain. So when you're looking at cyber criminal, that's basically the same kind of thing, except a little broader, right? And then a cyber terrorist, which gets into the hacktivist portion of this, which is state sponsored, China state sponsored stuff, and they try to down certain equipment within the government that they're attacking. All right, so there are what we call attack vectors. These are not the attack itself. So lots of times people will say rootkit is a type of attack or phishing is a type of attack. And we say that because that makes sense. But when you start getting into cybersecurity, as many of you are already aware, we have to break things down even further. And so attack vectors are a way something could be attacked, like in Star Wars, vector, whatever, whatever, right? Attack vector 6. I can't remember what they say in the movie. But that's basically saying, hey, we're going to use this path, and then we'll perpetrate the attack using that vector. So an advanced persistent threat is something that is always there and undetected. In other words, you haven't thought of it, and that's dangerous. Those kinds of things do happen. Then you have a blended threat, which is very dangerous because it's using a virus or a Trojan horse and also doing something else, right? Malicious code in a single payload. Let's use a virus to get into the system, and then we'll open up a back door to two separate things. Phishing, right? The act of fraudulently using email specifically, to try to get the recipient to reveal personal data. That's used all the time. And then a rootkit. Now, this is broadened out in its definition. So in some material, rootkit doesn't quite mean the same thing as it does here. So here it's basically saying you get backdoor privileges. You get root privileges, and they're calling that a rootkit. So once installed, the attacker has full control over the system. Smishing, a variation of phishing that involves using texting. So I wish they would just, call it phishing. Don't be so grainial. But it's called smishing. And then social engineering, actually trying to trick somebody into divulging data, which, when you really look at it, smishing and phishing are both types of social engineering attacks, right? But because they're so prevalent and they're used that way all the time, they have divided that down further. All right, spam, just mail that you don't want. Trojan horse, a program which seems harmless, but it's actually doing something else. And there's a lot of them out there. There's a lot of people that download games, and they're also recording everything you do. And then a virus, right? The piece of programming code usually decides that something else that causes the computer to behave unacceptably. The virus has to attach to a program. The virus cannot run on its own. It has to attach to a program in order to run. Vishing, similar to schmishing, except the victims receive a voicemail telling them to call a phone number. This is used all the time. And then a worm is basically a smarter virus, right? So worms are different than viruses in that they can propagate without having to be attached onto another system, another program, and they can replicate without having any interference from you. And they can also understand networks, which they don't talk about here too much. All right, so just so you know, ransomware is a huge thing, massive thing. It often demands Bitcoin payment because that's a very easy way for them to try to stay anonymous. And of course, attacks are on the increase, and average ransom demands are over $1,000. And 20% of victims never recover their files. So in this kind of situation, they may actually gain a backdoor into your system and go ahead and encrypt your hard drive. And then you're locked out of those encrypted files because they have the password to it. And then they say, you pay us money, and you pay them money, and 20% of them, right, never get their files back. So infected email attachments and pop-up windows are the biggest reasons for that. That's why you just don't open email attachments and you don't click on things in pop-up windows. It's that bad. Now, they also put here that there's vulnerability in software such as Microsoft Server Message Block, which is true but not. Microsoft has updated Server Message Block many times, but a lot of IT people stay on the old version for backwards compatibility, and that causes a problem. All right, distributed denial of service attacks. So what happens is a hacker takes over the computer via the internet. The target computer responds to a stream of automated requests, and you become part of a botnet. So the botnet is a large group of targeted computers controlled by the hacker. So what ends up happening is this. A denial of service attack means that I'm going to keep your website or your server busy so much that it will deny other people service. That's the point. So I'm going to keep it busy answering my ping requests because it has to, well, they don't have to answer anymore, but we'll just say this is rudimentary. They have to answer the ping request. So they're answering you and you're pinging them thousands and thousands of times a second, and they don't answer the legitimate requests. So the legitimate requests are denying services. So that's pretty easy to protect against these days within a network that you just see it happen. And so almost every system these days, when it receives a bunch of requests from one IP, it just goes, you know what, I'm ignoring you because you are perpetrating a denial of service attack on me. So a way to get around it is to distribute that denial of service. And the only way to do that is to get hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, millions of computers that are going to request that data for you. And that's where the botnet comes in. So they infest your computer with some kind of Trojan, some kind of virus, some kind of worm, however they delivered the payload. And then your computer becomes part of that botnet, and it's just sitting there waiting for instructions. Once the instructions are received to attack a certain website, to attack a certain server, they go ahead and do it. That is a lot harder for anybody to deal with, and it happens all the time. And people on the backside of it are programming switches and routers to go, okay, don't pay attention to these. Yeah, it's a big thing. The term data breach means unauthorized individuals or release access sensitive data. So when somebody says we've had a data breach, it means we have data on something and somebody else got into it that wasn't supposed to get into it and they grabbed the data. That's a data breach. All right, so you can look at these yourself. Let's move on because there's a lot. All right, let's talk about what's really happening. The increase in people being able to gain a job within cybersecurity is due to the fact that businesses have finally realized the cost of having a data breach, of being hacked, being ransomware, being all this different stuff, right? They finally realized that there's this massive direct cost, but disruption to business, cost of recovering the data, restoring from backups. This one's a huge one. You got breached. I'm not going to use you anymore. And of course, there's legal consequences that go along with it. Business is always willing to spend money to save money. And so in the beginning, when all this stuff was starting, they really didn't think about it. It's like, we're doing fine. Stick your head in the sand and not think about it. Then, of course, once some big breaches happen and they look at what happens to somebody else and they're like, whoa, that decimated their business. We better spend money on people that know what to do. Now, there's a bunch of computer fraud protection acts that have come around. Not enough, in my opinion, but you can look at those. You will need to look at those. And now the last thing I want to cover. This is a big overarching thing. And because you were in cybersecurity, most of you probably don't even want to listen to this because you already know, and that's fine. CIA, that is a triad. So that's a triangle. And in each of those triangles, or corners, not triangles, you have one of these. So there is confidentiality, there is integrity, and there is availability. In order to be secure, you have to have all three of those covered. You have to keep things confidential. You have to make sure the data is actually what it's supposed to be and it's unaltered. And it has to be available for use all the time. When you do that, when you say, I've got to have those three, then you have to use a layered security solution. You have to use a way that's going to actually layer your security. Okay, so what do we mean by layered? Security on the PC, training on the people, security on the network, security on your connections to the internet, security within software, security within network. A good example is firewall active on the PC, firewall active on the network, right? You have to have these different layers because those are the layers that are exposed, right? Understanding, again, that layers within operating systems, layers within networking, layers within security, so that you're covering each exposed layer. Sorry, need to click over there. All right. So, and that's what this is describing to you, right? All of these layers that you have to deal with. And honestly, a huge part of the security courses is understanding that you've got policies within your organization, you've got policies that are enforced on the network, like how long your password is and so on. And then how we develop applications, right? Policies for that. Policies for the computer, firewall has to be active, and then that's going to protect the organization's assets. And this goes through different components of that. I'm not going to go blow by blow through that because it's there. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to cover. They do show you the differences there and the different kinds of attacks and the threats and so on that happen, which is fantastic. And all the different acts that have been put in place that you have to keep track of. So if you were in incident handler, right, there's a ton of that stuff in. All right. Oh, yes. And then let's deal with the authentication methods. And I will stop this video here after our authentication methods. So authentication means that how can you gain access to something, right? Authorization means that I need to prove who I am. I'm authorized to access this material. Authentication is the process of basically being, in most situations, authorized to do something. Another way of looking at it is James McBride has a login, which is how he authenticates to the network, but he's not authorized to access these folders. So there's three types of user credentials. Sorry, I don't know what's wrong with me today. Something you know, which is a password, something you possess, like a key, and something you are, like a fingerprint. And that's really what we're talking about here. I know a password, I possess a physical key to get into the building, and I have a fingerprint. Right? There's these three types of credentials. Using two-factor authentication, that means I need to use two of these factors, two of them instead of just one. And that increases security a lot. So you've done this, you had to do this, where basically it's like, okay, I know my Google email. Well, a lot of people do, right? Because that's exposed. That's something that you see, but that is something you know. But you also know the password that goes to it. And that's pretty secure, depending on how secure your password is. But we can make it even more secure if we force a key code to go to something you possess, which is your phone. So the key comes to something you possess, your phone. You don't have this phone with this phone number, then you don't get in. Right? That increases the security on that much more than ×2. Now, biometric authentication, right? That's psychological, behavioral measures. That's fingerprint. That's a retina scan. That's voice analysis, all that kind of stuff. Something that's us. All right, actually, I think that I'm going to end it there. This video is long enough, so let me go ahead and stop it. Questions for Chapter 2, please let me know, and I will answer them as well as